All right, welcome to screencast number 1 for Unit 5, Lesson 2, and I'm on page 236. We're not going to spend a great deal of time on this, but there's kind of a few things that I'd like to highlight and let you know about. So first of all, any body, planet, whatever, anything out in space that orbits a larger body is called a satellite. So for instance, the Earth, because it orbits around the sun, is one of the sun's satellites, okay? The moon, because it orbits the larger Earth, the moon is the Earth's satellite. And the moon is actually the only natural satellite that we have. We have a lot of other satellites that we've actually put in space to orbit around the Earth, communications satellites, orbiting telescopes, things like that. But the only natural satellite that we have is the moon. So the planets are satellites of the sun, and then if that particular planet has moons, then those moons are satellites for that planet. Okay? All right, let's look down at the bottom of page 236. What keeps the moon in orbit around the Earth? What keeps the Earth in orbit around the sun? And it is a force called gravity. Gravity is determined, the amount of gravitational force is determined basically by the mass of the objects involved and how much distance there is between them. There is a little bit of an error here. The authors of this particular textbook, I guess, are trying to simplify a concept for you. But when we learn Newton's third law, it states that for every force there's an equal and opposite reaction force. So we can't have one thing pulling harder on another thing. But they're trying to save you some confusion. But anyway, cross this out where it says, and therefore Earth's gravity exerts a stronger pull on the moon than the moon does on the Earth. That is not correct. We can get into why there's more surface gravity on the Earth than there is on the moon, but that's not really something that we need to worry about for this lesson. If you're curious about it, you can come talk to me. Okay, go to the next red heading that says the moon orbits Earth. The pull of gravity, the pull of Earth's gravity, keeps the moon in orbit around the Earth, just like the sun's gravity or gravitational interaction between the sun and the Earth keep the Earth in orbit around the sun. Okay? Now, how far is our moon from us? Well, it's 383,000 miles on average, but kilometers. But we don't really think in terms of kilometers usually here in America. It's about 238,000 miles, so a little bit under 250,000 miles from the Earth to the moon. Okay? All right, so make sure that you have underlined and written in the little tidbits that I left you. Okay, I know this is caught in the margin, but it says we have many artificial satellites, but only one natural satellite. Okay, so hopefully that is a little bit better. Again, write these items in, and remember that a satellite is simply a body out in space, an object out in space that orbits another body. All right, go to page 237, and it says, what does the moon look like from Earth? Okay, so we're on this page now. So the moon is only visible from Earth when it reflects the sunlight that reaches the moon. Okay, the moon does not produce its own light. Okay, the Earth doesn't produce its own light either. The only reason why you can see those things or see any other planets from space is the fact that they're reflecting sunlight. Okay, and however much of the illuminated side or the lit up side of the moon we see is going to determine our lunar phases, as you'll learn. Okay, so the moon's only visible from Earth basically because it's reflecting sunlight that reaches the moon. Okay, now the moon is up at night sometimes during the day sometimes part of the day and part of the night, etc. And actually the moon can be up just as often during the day as it is at night. But why don't we tend to notice it during the day? Well, the sun's out during the day, and the moon is not going to be very obvious in the sky. It'll be very faint a lot of times, and so it's very easy to miss. Okay? So, in the daytime, the moon may be only as bright as a thin cloud and can be easily missed, so underline that. On some days you'll see the moon during both the daytime and the nighttime. Other days you may not see the moon at all. So if the moon is in part of its orbit around the Earth, and it tends to be in the part of the sky that's not too terribly far from the sun, then the moon is going to be very, very, very hard to see. Just because the sun's really, really bright. It's not that it's not there, it's just going to be very hard to see. Okay? Look down in the second paragraph on this page. It's interesting that the same side of the moon always faces the Earth, and we usually call that side the near side. It's not necessarily the side that's always illuminated by the sun, but the same side of the moon always faces Earth. Okay? The reason for this is the moon actually completes one rotation on its own axis in the same amount of time that it completes a revolution around the Earth. Okay? And if you talk about taking into account the Earth's progress around the sun, so remember that the Earth is orbiting the sun at the same time that the moon is orbiting the Earth. If you take that into account, the time it takes for the lunar cycle to go from new moon to new moon is about 29 and a half days. It's about a month. Okay? Okay, so just make sure that you've written in that the time it takes for the lunar phases to begin to repeat themselves is 29 and a half days. I mean, the time from new moon to new moon is about 29 and a half days. If you want to go from full moon to the next full moon, it's about 29 and a half days. Okay? Just to make sure that you're paying attention, why don't you put a star in the upper right-hand corner of page 237, and then you can join me for screencast number 2 in just a second.